I will be in Snowflake, Arizona, doing a book signing at the Purgatory on Main Street on September 16th. If you would like to have me come to your area for a book signing or a speaking event, please feel free to reach out to me through the website or at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. I would love to be there for you. Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is meant for educational purposes only. Please join our community on Facebook. So, Mason, the real question about today's episode is, are you going to pull a Red Foreman?
I don't know what that means.
We have been binge watching That 70s Show, mostly because by the end of the day...
you have been binge watching That 70s Show, and we joined in on occasion.
That is true, which is probably why you're not getting my reference right now, you dumbass. So, welcome to our special episode of Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm your host, Sarah Westbrook, joined by Mason as the co-host, Mason Westbrook.
Here I am.
And we are going to celebrate and explore the value of truth-telling at a personal and also an organizational and historical level. And yeah, so that's what we're doing today. We are so organized. We sound amazing. So yes, Mason's goal is to not pull a red during today's episode, and we'll go into that a little bit further later on. So one of the things that is really obnoxious when you publish a book is you start with this timeline. And since this is my first book that I've published, my timeline was probably somewhat unrealistic. And so if you've been listening to our podcast for a while, you're going to hear, yeah, it's going to come out in the spring. Oh, it's going to be the summer. Just kidding. It's going to be the fall. And a lot of that was
not obnoxious at all.
Right, not obnoxious at all. A lot of that was my naivety about what came next. But also it's just the process of publishing a book. And so the initial dates that I was given by my publishing firm were not the dates that we hit. And the main reason is because my book is really, really long.
Well, long for this kind of a book.
Yeah,
it's
long
not
for a memoir.
Book,
nah, whatever. Anyway.
It's long for this kind of book.
Right. So for nonfiction, it's a long book for nonfiction. And so when the publisher gave me the dates, they were giving me dates based on an approximate 80,000 words for the book, which ends up being like, 250 to 300 pages. But my book is closer to 130,000 words and 550 pages. And so that's why the dates have been later. And so when my publishing firm, when my concierge, his name is Roy, he's been awesome. Thank you, everybody at Book Launchers. If y'all are in a place where you're wanting to publish a nonfiction book, Book Launchers is a great way to go. They only do nonfiction. They do not do fiction. Somebody, I guess, contacted them and said, oh, Sarah recommended me, and it was a children's book. And no. They don't do children's books. They do nonfiction only, which, that's their genre. And they are a publishing firm, and they have been absolutely amazing. It has been an honor to work with them. My book is so much better off for it. It has definitely been a learning experience, and I'm very grateful for them. So Roy at Book Launchers sends me an email, and he says, all right, so you're really close to launch. We've got a couple of dates. And he said September 6th, and then whatever the next Wednesday is after the 6th. What is that, Mace? Like
the 13th?
The 13th. Or the following Wednesday after that, because apparently they do launches all on Wednesdays. And when he told me that I could release my book on September 6th, 2023, I said absolutely that date, because September 6th, if you're familiar with Mormonism, the September 6th is kind of an iconic cultural phenomenon in Mormonism. And I thought, what could be better than releasing my book, which is the most honest thing I have ever done in my entire life. I am totally exposed. What better way to celebrate the sacrifices of the men and women who came before all of us podcasters? Like, we're talking about the same time that John Lynne would have started Mormon Stories. So it's what, Mason? September of 1993 is what we're talking about?
Yeah.
That's the date.
Way before John Lynne and Mormon Stories.
Okay, so before John Lynne, before Bill Reel, really before the internet.
Well, and I have to say, I'm going to interrupt you there for a second. What? You said it was kind of a phenomenon for Mormonism, but I wouldn't agree with that. I would say it's kind of a phenomenon for ex-Mormonism, but most Mormons I know and have asked about it don't have any clue what September 6th was or the September 6th excommunications. Like most things in Mormonism, if the Mormon Church doesn't like it, it's just swept away. We don't talk about it anymore. We don't address it. That happened. Now just leave it alone. We don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a big deal, maybe kind of a turning point in a lot of ways for a lot of the ex-Mormon community. But Mormons don't talk about it. I certainly didn't know anything about it.
I had heard about it, but I didn't really know what it was. And then when I asked somebody, they were like, oh, it was because they were publishing anti-Mormon literature. And so at that point, when I was actively participating in Mormonism, I would have heard that the September 6th were publishing or advocating for anti-Mormon things, and I would have thought stopped, and I wouldn't have gone any further.
I'm not going to study that, right? What's the point?
To figure it out. And yet, when you look it up, the September 6th are all individuals. So I'm going to actually read this. I got this right off the Wikipedia site. And so I'm going to read this as best I can. I'm still struggling with double vision, so we'll see how well I do. It's big text, though. I zoomed in, so that way, hopefully I can do a little bit better here with my reading skills for today. For anybody interested, the neurologist said, enough is enough. Come do your steroid infusions. And I basically said, I am not going to be admitted to the hospital for this. He said, great, we do them outpatient, you know. So I said, oh, well, let's do that. So yay me. I start my infusions tomorrow. So by the time September 6th actually rolls around, hopefully my vision will be clearing up at that point. Okay, so I'm going to read this right off the Wikipedia site. The link is in the show notes if you want to go and read this as well. But this is Wikipedia's synopsis. They said the September 6th were 6 members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who were excommunicated or disfellowshipped by the LDS Church, also known as the Mormons, in September 1993 for speaking against church doctrine and leadership. The term September 6 was coined by the Salt Lake Tribune, and the term was used in the media and subsequent discussion. The LDS Church's action was referred to by critics as evidence of an anti-intellectual posture on the part of LDS leadership. And we're going to talk about each of these individuals and what they were doing and the value of what they were doing as they spoke what I'm going to say is objective truth. For the most part, I would say objective truth. So did you have anything else you wanted to add, Mace, or do we want to jump right in with these? Oh, I have a story I want to tell first.
No, I think we should just jump right in. So go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things that I remember growing up, and Mason, did you ever have that family home evening lesson? I mean, I told you about it. So you guys had this. Yeah. Okay. So there was a common family home evening lesson.
This is more Mormon than the Book of Mormon right here. This lesson.
This family home evening lesson. All right.
It was in primary. Yeah, it was all over the place.
On our Facebook and Instagram and Twitter sites. So this is a shout out to Michael. I want you to, make sure this happens when this episode drops. I would like to see how many people had this family home evening lesson. Either you gave it or you received it. I'm going to say in the 80s, 90s, and probably early 2000s was when it was really popular. But I remember there was a big spider. It probably came out of the family home evening manual that they had back then. It'd be interesting. Anyway, there was a spider.
It's that right there.
Oh my goodness, Mason is pulling it up.
No, it's not a spider, but this was from the
that's
new era. It showed somebody
that's your
with a
new
string
era
all
one.
around their face.
No, the one that I'm talking about was a spider spinning its web.
I don't remember the spider. It's just, yeah. So,
okay.
Anyway.
So, spider spinning its web. So I remember there was a little boy sitting in a chair, and then my mom had this spider that's a little cutout of a spider, and it had, I'm going to say, black yarn coming out of its butt, because I don't know why. It's probably the only yarn we had in the house at the time. And what would happen is they read us a story about this little boy who was telling all of these lies. And for every lie, the spider would wrap another round of web around the little boy. And basically the visual was to illustrate that as you tell lies, it's really difficult to remember all of the details, so then you end up getting caught, and that telling the truth is liberating, or it's freedom. And then I remember my mom taking scissors and cutting the yarn to free the boy. He's free. He's free. And so anyway, because then when he came out and he told the truth, he didn't have to remember all of the extra details of the lie, because he had experienced the truth. And so the truth was better than the lie, because then you don't get trapped in Satan's web. Is kind of the illustration. The truth shall make you free, right? The truth shall set you free, damn it. I had to throw in a swear.
Yeah, apparently.
I had to throw in a swear. It was important.
Was it?
It was important. Uh-huh. Okay, so where's the scripture that says, "And the truth shall set you free"? That's a scripture, isn't it?
Yeah, the New Testament.
It's in the New Testament. Okay, Hey, biblical truth now.
Now we better look it up and make sure.
Yeah, Mason's probably wrong. Y'all, since he quit Mormonism a little while ago, his quad mentality is starting to disappear. His memory isn't quite as sharp now that you're not preaching it every Sunday.
See, I was right.
John chapter 8, verse 31, "And the truth shall set you free." Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we had an episode, and I don't remember what number that was. So, Mason, why don't you look that up real quick and see what episode. We did an episode earlier about why do people lie. And in that episode that Mason is rapidly searching for.
Not so rapidly, really.
Hey, hurry it up. Okay. Anyway, in that episode, Why We Lie, we asserted that people lie because there is a fear of the outcome if they don't. That more often than not, so most, I would say always, but I don't like that word, so almost always, when somebody is lying, there is an underlying fear that they are trying to avoid in telling that lie. And so if you can identify the fear, you're more likely to get an honest answer. So Mason, what episode 24. Was it? Episode 24.
It was easier just to Google it. I love that. That's fun too.
Wait, you're Googling us?
Yep.
That is freaking awesome. Alrighty, so he's Googling us. Woo! You can Google us now. The algorithms are working in our favor. So anyway, we talked about that fear base. Why are we lying? Well, because there's a fear. And I would say that, in my opinion, professional and personal, one of the reasons why LDS history, the icky history stuff, is what we like to say whitewashed, or the reason it was hidden for so long was most likely due to leaders in the hierarchy of the church being afraid of the members' response if they knew the truth. And prior to the internet, it was rare for people to know the, objective historical accuracy of those stories, because in order to have access to the, source material in the documents, you had to be a historian or a BYU educator. You had to have some sort of a position.
Or you had to listen to something that was considered anti-Mormon.
Right.
You had to pay attention to the Tanners or the God Makers or something like that. And even though most of that was true, it always felt like looking back at it now, a lot of it was true, or even most of it was true. It was always with this flair of Mormonism is terrible. And so even if you were looking just to get the information, it was hard to do. So, yeah.
Right. And
just leave that stuff alone.
Sandra and Gerald, right? It's Gerald. Sandra and Gerald Tanner were probably the pioneers of trying to get the accurate historical information to the general public. And therefore they were, antithesis.
Pariah. They were a pariah.
They were a pariah? I don't even know what that word means. What is pariah?
Let me look up the actual meaning of the word, but pariah means something that you want to stay away from.
Why am I trying to say antithesis? What word am I trying to say?
Antithesis?
Yes. What does that mean? Squirrel, ADHD. Ah.
So pariah is someone or something that is despised or rejected.
Right. So Mormon leaders looked at them as just automatically reject them. The Tanners are 100% anti. And so a good Mormon would not associate with any of the material being put out by their, I think it's called the Lighthouse Ministry.
I'm not sure. Antithesis is the exact opposite. So the direct opposite.
Right. And that's that's what it means. It means the direct opposite.
So I'm not sure it really applies in what you're talking about. But
no, I was saying that they were the exact opposite of what the church wanted.
That's
what I was trying to say.
So they were the antithesis of Mormon learning.
This is Sarah trying to use big words without an editor to tell her to knock it off. Okay. So there we go.
Sometimes you have to use big words.
I like using big words and I sound really smart. But on the podcast, I show that I'm not really as smart as I wanted to sound. Okay, here we go.
I like to use big words because sometimes it makes me sound more photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis. Yeah, you know what? I think that you and I really like to make words up because it's so much fun.
We haven't done that very much, just every once in a while. Really, especially at the beginning of this podcast, we did that a few times.
Oh my goodness, we make up words a lot. If you were in our house, we're like, wait a minute, is that even a real word? Well, I know what you're trying to say, so it doesn't matter, and we just move on with life.
So I'm looking at one of the profiles for the September 6th, right? And one of the things that comes up on the right here is a thought from Ezra Taft Benson. It says, if you allow the people of the church to turn you against the church, then you were not worthy to be in the church in the first place.
Oh, that's generous. that comes from a loving prophet of God.
Yeah.
If you make... That's so funny. Oh my gosh. Read it again. So if you
allow the people of the church to turn you against the church, then you were not worthy to be in the church in the first place.
Wow. So let's just erase.
Well, just ignore the behavior of the church, right? The church members. Right. Just ignore the behavior of the church members. Don't listen to what they have to say because the church is true.
Right?
Yeah.
That's nuts. Okay. So let's talk about our September 6th. So the first one is Lynne Kanavel Whitesides. So Lynne did not get excommunicated. Lynne is the one that was disfellowshipped. Yep. And she was disfellowshipped for speaking out about a mother in heaven. She was disfellowshipped on September 14th of 1993. She's technically still a member. However, I believe this is the one that a few years later they said, hey, can we lift this disfellowshipment? And Salt Lake said, oh, hell no. Hey, head on over to Amazon and buy your copy of Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in Complex PTSD by me, Sarah Westbrook. So for whatever reason, and nobody really knows why, she has not yet been allowed to come back. So I'm reading off of Wikipedia. It says Whitesides claims that she burst out of the church and her marriage in 93 and now considers herself a practitioner of Native American philosophies, and she represents the Peyote Native Americans in a Native American church.
Right.
So,
and on Was Mormon, it says she's a writer and feminist who is disfellowshipped for her involvement in publishing and advocating for greater gender equality within the church. So
I think that the value of Lynne's work is that she was really kind of like the Kate Kelly predecessor, because the Mormon church is really good at saying we treat men and women equally. And one of the things so I've got a really good friend. Her name is Shelly. Hey, Shelly, shout out to you. If you want to go see Shelly at Horn Auto in Sholo, Arizona, Shelly will hook you up with an awesome deal for a car. That is your free advertisement, Horn Auto. Don't expect to get another one. So absolutely love Shelley. Shelley sent me a message when I said, hey, what parts of what I said really inspired you? And Shelley's response was, you were able to put into words some of the same thoughts that I had as a kid growing up in some of the unfairness of the dynamics between men and women in the church. And, you know, she said that for her growing up, she had the same thoughts, but she didn't share them out loud because she thought she was the only one having them.
Yeah.
And so for her, being able to hear in that child's voice. So in the beginning of my book, when I'm really little, you can tell that my voice is that of a 6-year-old or an 11-year-old, or, as you know, basically Sarah's voice grows up throughout the book. And so being able to kind of verbalize these really confusing or contradictory things. So I wrote down the mixed messages. Feeling perpetually inadequate is something that Shelley said really spoke to her and was really healing for her, because up till, you know, present day, she hadn't really ever put a pin in it and said, I felt that same way. And it's really good to not be alone in that. So I love that. For those of you who aren't familiar with Kate Kelly, she was the ordained women leader, basically saying, hey, let's give equal rights.
She was excommunicated as well.
Right. She was excommunicated because the priesthood is for men only.
Right. It's interesting to me that there's 6 names on this, right? The September 6th is 6 names. 3 of them are female, and all 3 of them were attacked essentially for
something
looking
feministic.
for better gender equality. Yeah. Lavina, an editor and writer who was accused of apostasy for publicly questioning the church's treatment of women and its handling of historical documents. Maxine Hanks, a writer and feminist theologian who was excommunicated for involvement in a publication that was seen as promoting feminist ideas that were at odds with the church teachings. And then you already talked about Lynne Whitesides. But all 3 of them were, and I'm sure there were other things. This is really a quick little blurb, but the main thing they put on here is that they were looking for equality in the church, and still not there.
Right.
Still not there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if I want to go to the temple, I have to get permission from a man. If I make a mistake and I go confess, I'm confessing to a man, and that man gets to decide my fate moving forward, which is illustrated, I think, very well twice in my book, because Sarah got disfellowshipped twice during her Mormon story. Both times for sex with the same guy. Damn it. All right, so let's talk about Lavina, Fielding Anderson a little bit more. So on the Wikipedia site, Lavina had worked as an editor for the Ensign and an editor for the Journal of Mormon History. And one of the things that I am so grateful to Lavina for is that she was the one that pushed for the Joseph Smith History by his mother. What is that book, Mason?
Joseph Smith History by his mother.
Oh, I got it right?
That's what it's called. Yeah.
I got it right. Okay, so she was one of the people. She was the one that said, we need to get the definitive edition of the Lucy Mack narrative back in the hands of the people. Because if you remember, I believe it was Brigham Young who ordered those books to be burned. A History of Joseph Smith by his mother, the initial copy, Brigham Young said, that's full of lies. Burn them, get rid of them as a way to hide some of the icky stuff. And it was Lavina Anderson who said, no, the people deserve her words about her son and let them make up their own mind.
Right. So I want to read the thing that I had from D. Michael Quinn. We're going to talk about him here in just a minute. But one of the things he says is, I find it one of the fundamental ironies of modern Mormonism that the general authorities who praise free agency also do their best to limit free agency's prerequisites: access to information, uninhibited inquiry, and freedom of expression. So and if it doesn't give you pause, at the very least, if it doesn't give you pause, that a prophet, quote unquote, prophet of God, does not want you to read the biography of the mother of the founder of the church, if it doesn't at least give you pause, then you are not paying attention.
Right, because if you think about it, the mother of Prophet Joseph Smith had no reason to lie. She believed his story. She dedicated the rest of her life to the church that he founded.
Well, she didn't go to Salt Lake.
Right. She didn't go to Salt Lake.
But she was an active and supportive member until that point. And really probably the reason she didn't go was for health reasons.
Right. Because she was old at that point and her husband had passed away already.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think I misspoke earlier because it's Lavina Anderson. I don't think it was Lynne Whitesides. Lynne Whitesides looks, when I'm looking more into this document, Lynne Whitesides is very happy, according to this, as a member of a Native American church that she helped to found, it looks like. Found. Oh my gosh, my words are getting away from me. She helped found a Native American church and is attending there. But it's Lavina Anderson who is editing, and I don't know if this is still going on, editing a multi-volume case reports of the Mormon Alliance, an ongoing collection of interviews with Mormons who believe they were unfairly disciplined by the church. So Lavina Anderson gets excommunicated for speaking out for women and for trying to bring back the authentic narrative of Lucy Mack Smith to the church's public eye so that they have access to the mother of the prophet. Yeah. Maxine Hanks, there's really not a lot of information on this Wikipedia thing. It just says Maxine Hanks is a feminist theologian who compiled and edited the book Women and Authority, Reemerging Mormon Feminism. She was excommunicated September 19th, 1993, along with fellow contributor D. Michael Quinn. But it doesn't really talk about her story as much. Is there anything on the Was Mormon?
No, I read already what it said about her. So, yeah.
Okay.
And of course, you know, again, these are short little blurbs. I'm sure there's more to the story for both in what they were doing and in why they were excommunicated. But that is the bulk of the reason, is that they had, in this case, it says, a publication that was seen as promoting feminist ideas that were at odds with the church's teachings. Right. Well, frankly, all feminist teachings are at odds with the church's teachings. Like, the only way a woman really can thrive in the church is if they just shelf the fact that they do not have equal authority.
Right.
That's the only way that you can thrive. You have to shelve it. You have to convince yourself that you're okay with it, and then move on. Well,
and I hate that in General Conference you have all of these men and women talking about leaning into their priesthood leaders and following their priesthood leaders' counsel and basically teaching the women to turn their brains off and follow the priesthood. Like, it really bugs me because...
Well, and that's the church in general. You have to turn your brain off.
You know, that's a really good point. I remember when I was pregnant. So for those of you, and this I don't really go into in my book, but I struggled with infertility. I touch on it a little bit in my book, but I don't really go into the challenges of being infertile, especially in Mormonism, where I had been raised from the time I was itty bitty, being told that my primary role in life was to bring forth as many children as I could, as my body would allow, and be a mother. Like, that was my divine role.
You don't have much worth beyond that. Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, I don't talk about that, but over the course of time, I got pregnant 11 times, and I carried 3 of my children to term, and I miscarried the rest of them. And I remember we were in North Carolina at this time. We were visiting your parents. Something about visiting your parents and miscarrying, because I miscarried, I think, twice at their house.
Wow.
The very first one, and then this one that I'm getting ready to talk about. But this one that I'm getting ready to talk about was the one where I was 13 weeks along. So that was all of my other miscarriages happened prior to 8 weeks gestation. So when it was the 8 weeks gestation, I learned to compartmentalize. I looked at it from a very scientific perspective of something wasn't right in the DNA.
Right.
So nature did what nature does.
Right.
And I moved forward. And so if the very first time I miscarried, I was devastated. And then the one that I miscarried when I was 13 weeks, which I thought I was, in the clear at that point, because the first 12 weeks is your first trimester.
Right.
But then when they ended up going in and doing the D&C, it looked like everything had stopped developing around 11 weeks. And so still just absolutely devastating. But I remember being at your parents' house. I'm bleeding, which is nerve-wracking. We are hours away from my bishop / OBGYN / infertility specialist / I was his primary president. It was awkward. There was some conflict of interest going on in that relationship. But anyway, he and still is one of the world's renowned infertility specialists. And I was very grateful for his expertise when it came to treating me for infertility. He was by far and away the most qualified and best infertility doctor I have ever seen. And I saw a lot of them because we were military. So we moved constantly. So anytime I wanted to get pregnant, I had to go to a different doctor. That's just the way the military works. And so anyway, I was 13 weeks gestation when I started bleeding. We're at your parents' house. I asked for a priesthood blessing, and your dad's priesthood blessing, your dad gave the blessing instead of you, for whatever reason. And your dad said something along the lines of, be at peace. The baby is fine. You will deliver a healthy baby. You'll carry to term. You'll deliver a healthy baby. Blah, 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 whatever. And I remember it almost felt like your dad was like, stop worrying about this because it's cramping my style. That's kind of how it felt. We're supposed to be playing rook, damn it. And you're worried about miscarrying your baby. Like, get over it. It's not that big of a deal. It's kind of how it felt, to be honest. And Mason's over there laughing and shaking his head. Yeah, like, yup, that's my dad. And I knew instantly, like, your dad pronounced that blessing, which is supposed to be, he was a bishop at the time. Your dad was a bishop at the time. And Mason, you were serving as the first counselor in the bishopric at the time. And I remember going, that's not true. Instantly it was, that's not the truth. You are losing this baby and everything is okay. Like, I had this overwhelming sense of peace of the baby is gone. You're going to be okay. And so we went home after that weekend visit with your parents. I probably went in and saw Dr. Parker the following Monday, whatever. Went in because, we texted him, hey, I'm bleeding. Great, come in. Let's see what's going on. I went in. Baby was dead. I had a D&C later that afternoon due to extreme pain that was shooting up into my shoulder. So they did the D&C as an add-on case. At the end of the day, Dr. Parker said baby was closer to 11 weeks, but all of your insides look healthy. We're going to give you a few months break of infertility medicine. We're going to try again. And the next time I got pregnant, I was able to deliver a healthy baby boy who is now 12 and picking his nose and wiping his boogers on my windows. Just going to be honest. That's what he is today. And he's healthy, and it was a healthy pregnancy, and all was well. But the fact that your dad, under that priesthood power, had priesthood blessings bug me now. Now that I'm out of the church, they bug me. Because it felt like I was giving my moment of grief over to a man, and that man had no concept of what it was like to be in that position, to lose a baby that you were excited for. Infertility treatment sucks. Losing a baby is horrific, and I did it a lot. And
there's pressure in the church for a man to say the right things, quote unquote, or to bring comfort and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I haven't actually thought about that. Like your dad, the pressure for your dad. Like I know your mom, I think, had one miscarriage, but your mom's pregnancies were pretty non-complicated. She delivered, I think, all 6 of you at home, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like your
I don't know
parents.
how many miscarriages she had. So
I know that she had one.
I know at least one.
Yeah, at least
she showed
one.
us.
Right. And all 6 of her kids were delivered at home. My mom also, no complications in pregnancy. My mom was like the water breaks, 3 hours later a baby is born. Like my mom was rapid fast.
Right.
With that, I did not get that gene. I got holy crap, I got 24-hour labors, lots of intervention, lots of complications, and whatnot. So yeah, I didn't even think about, though, for the man, the pressure for a man who genuinely believes that they're speaking in behalf of God, the pressure to do it right and to say the right thing has got to be overwhelming for a man. We should write that down. We should do a whole episode on that.
We're going to do an episode. We've done an episode kind of on women and the role that women have in the church and all that. And we're going to do an episode on men and how men are... we're going to do an episode about men as well.
Men are conditioned to behave a certain way as well. Yeah. They are not toxic. They're wounded. Is that the one that you're talking about?
Yeah.
That one's coming up in a little while. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So might be the next one that we do. I don't know.
Spoilers. So, Spoilers. All right.
Anyway, let's get back to the September 6th
our
so we can talk about your book.
Is Avraham Gileadi. Avraham, and this is Avraham Gileadi, was or is a Hebrew scholar and literary analyst. And according to Wikipedia, he is considered theologically conservative. He authored some books about Isaiah, and anybody who can author anything to try and make more sense out of Isaiah is a hero in my book, because holy crap, that man, Isaiah, whatever, that was poetic nonsense. Put me to sleep. 2nd Nephi, thank you very much. The section of the Book of Mormon that was quote unquote plagiarized, shadowed, whatever you want to, whatever.
So on Was
not
Mormon,
plagiarized, because he did give... Joseph Smith gave credit. This is Isaiah's words. Bam. Here you go.
Right.
Here's Isaiah.
Right. On Was Mormon, it says a Hebrew scholar who was accused of apostasy for publishing a book on the book of Isaiah that was seen as promoting a non-traditional interpretation of the text. My guess is that has a lot to do with maybe 3 different writers of the book of Isaiah, that kind of thing, but I've never read anything of his, so I couldn't say for sure.
Well, and I think the other thing, though, is that he's a Hebrew scholar, so he would have been one of the people... like it was Joseph Smith who said the word Mormon literally means more good. Later, Gordon B. Hinckley says, no, that's not the literal meaning, but I'm going to use that as, in the spirit of Mormon means more good. But there's still the misconception today that Mormon is a literal translation from either Hebrew or whatever it is, ancient. What is the Book of Mormon supposed to have been written in? I forgot now.
Reformed Egyptian,
that Mormon means more good, whatever. Anyway, not true. My guess is Avraham probably called some awareness to, hey, the way that you're describing this isn't necessarily historically accurate. Let's correct that. That would be my assumption. Gileadi has been rebaptized and is currently an active member of the church. How he balances that, I don't know. But I know a lot of people are able to do that. So Wikipedia says that his reasons aren't super clear. It says the reasons for his excommunication are unclear. But honestly, if you're challenging the way Mormon leadership interprets the doctrine out loud in a forum that is open for public, you're going to probably get into trouble. Yeah. All right.
And I think there's a lot of scholarship now that purports that Isaiah was three different writers, and some of it was I don't know, but anyway, this is 30 years later, and of course a lot of what he was talking about then, which was completely quote unquote apostate, is now gradually becoming more accepted, and that's something that we want to talk about after these 3 as well, or these 6 as well.
Absolutely. So Paul Toscano is the next one, and frankly, he's my favorite on the Wikipedia definitions. I love what they say. So, so this says he was excommunicated, and the reasons from the church is that it was apostasy and false teachings, but according to Toscano, and this is why he's my favorite because he lets the church have it, the actual reason was insubordination in refusing to curb his sharp criticism of LDS church leaders' preference for legalism, ecclesiastical tyranny, whitewashed Mormon history, and hierarchical authoritarianism. Hierarchical authoritarianism that privilege the image of the corrupt LDS Church above its commitment to its members, to the teachings and revelations of Joseph Smith, its founding prophet, and to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Way to go, Paul. Like, seriously.
And he was a lawyer, so it makes sense there, too. I did put on the show notes, there's a link to an interview with him where they talk about a lot of what was going on. And
I want to see that.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
His wife, Margaret, faced her own tribunal or disciplinary council, which we now call the Council of Love.
Yeah,
it's not as hippie as it sounds. For her feminist views, technically she was part of the September 6 or 7 summoned in 1993, but the focus shifted to her husband. So hers was delayed until 2000. I believe she also got excommunicated, but not in the same month.
Yeah.
And want to give a shout out to Paul Toscano. Did he write this? Co-authored with his wife the books Strangers in Paradox, Explorations in Mormon Theology, and he co-founded the Mormon Alliance, which is the one where people publish their articles for I was disciplined by the church unfairly. And then he later wrote the book, The Sanctity of Dissent, and the sequel, The Sacrament of Doubt. So if you are interested in reading some of what Paul Toscano wrote, I would find those titles on Amazon. If they are on Amazon, Mason, let's put them in the show notes. I also like here that Toscano wrote that that losing his faith was like losing your eyesight after an accident, and that he regrets that LDS church leaders have disregarded his criticisms of what he considers the church's growing anti-intellectualism, homophobia, misogyny, and elitism. Basically what Paul is saying is, hey, church leaders, you're acting like the Pharisees, knock it off. And the church leaders are acting like Pharisees and saying, oh, let me show you how I can discredit you for having original thought, calling us on our BS. How dare you? Let's just shut you up and criminalize you, you truth teller, you, which the church is really good at. This is Sarah being a little snarky. Alrighty. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Mace, do you want to take D. Michael Quinn? Because I've done the rest. I've done most of the talking so far, and that's 42 minutes.
Well, that's about normal.
Yeah, it is. All right, go ahead.
So D. Michael Quinn, a historian and former professor at Brigham Young University who published research on church history.
What are you quoting or reading?
I'm just reading from the Was Mormon site. You've been doing Wikipedia. I've been doing Was Mormon.
Yeah, okay,
basically the same thing. But so historian and former professor at BYU who published research on church history that was seen as critical of church leaders and doctrines. One of the big ones was, at that time, was the fact that polygamy had continued past 1890. Mm-hmm. So that was a big one, and the fact that the history was just, hidden. He's gone on to publish a couple of books talking about the hierarchy and how Mormon leadership got to where they are and those kinds of things. But yeah.
I have read a book by D. Michael Quinn. I've read his Early Mormonism and the Magic World View, and it was fascinating because it helped me understand better where Joseph Smith came up with the ideas of things like the divining rod and the rock in the hat, and it made sense how he was able to get away with that. Because if a man came to me today with a stick or a rod and said, I can tell where buried treasure is in your backyard, I'd have been like, okay, let's call an ambulance. Let me talk to you. Let's get you some antipsychotics. Like, our worldview today would be like, okay, you're not mentally stable. Let's help you get some medicine. Let's give you a little bit of Haldol. Let's put you on some, Risperdal. or, something else, Zyprexa and Vega, Sarah knows her antipsychotics. Because I know for a long time, I felt like Joseph Smith might be on the schizophrenia spectrum because I've got a son on that spectrum, and he comes up with some wacky shit that he absolutely believes is fact despite all the evidence that he's not in touch with reality. And so I was like, maybe that was what Joseph Smith was experiencing. And after reading, D. Michael Quinn's book, I was like, maybe not. It was actually pretty common in that time period. And so that was really my first exposure of, set and setting. In the time period that Joseph Smith was coming up with his bullshit, it was pretty commonly accepted. Like magic and mythology was a lot more prevalent as realistic thought processes, which is why he was able to get away with it the way that he did. Yeah. I've started the book, The Mormon Hierarchy, Origins of Power, but frankly, I've been so busy with my own book, I haven't got through that one yet. But the one that really I want to read, I think I might skip this Origins of Power and go for same-sex dynamics among 19... Goodness gracious, I cannot read. Same-sex dynamics among 19th century Americans, a Mormon example. And I'm quoting from Wikipedia, which argues that homosexuality was not uncommon among early Mormons and was not seen as a serious sin or transgression. Despite his excommunication and critical writings, Quinn, who is openly gay, still considers himself to be a Latter-day Saint.
So was one of the things that was interesting to me is that more than half of these still consider themselves members of the church or believing. It's just interesting that the church takes after these ideas, but the people themselves still remain somewhat loyal. I'm sure there's lots of different reasons for that, but there is a couple things other that I want to read from D. Michael Quinn. Quote, general authorities in recent years have criticized Mormon historians for republishing in part or whole out-of-print church publications such as the 1830 Book of Mormon, the Journal of Discourses, edited and published for 32 years under the auspices of the First Presidency, and statements taken from former church magazines published for the children, youth, and general membership of the church. It is an odd situation when present general authorities criticize historians for reprinting what previous general authorities regarded not only as faith-promoting but as appropriate for Mormon youth and new converts. Again, it's just the idea that we don't talk about it. Whatever is there, we don't even want to see it anymore because we've moved on from that. And it just... He says one more thing. A more serious problem of Mormon history is involved in the implications of Boyd K. Packer's demand that historians demonstrate that, quote, the hand of the Lord has been in every hour and every moment of the church from its beginning to now, unquote. Every Mormon historian agrees with Ezra Taft Benson that, quote, we must never forget that ours is a prophetic history, unquote. But there are serious problems in the assertion or implication that this prophetic history of Mormonism requires the, quote, hand of the Lord, unquote, in every decision, statement, and action of the prophets. If this was so, we would have no changes in the principles and doctrines of the gospel. And it's just that idea that when you make a statement like the hand of the Lord has been in every hour and every moment of the church from its beginning to now, how else can you deal with some of that troubling stuff other than just hoping that people don't see it?
Right. Because if you say, hey, we screwed up, well, now we can say things like, oh, racism wasn't from God. That was just a product of the time that these members were there. And some of the leaders, the leaders were just like most of us. We see things through a filter of our own experiences. So, I would say that growing up, one of the things that I'm very grateful for to my parents, and I think I've said this before, is that my mom grew up as an Air Force brat and my dad grew up in LA, like in Burbank, California. And so, they were exposed, my parents were exposed to a lot more diversity than I was as a young child growing up in Snowflake, Arizona, where I think there were one or two black kids in our entire school. It just wasn't, there was no diversity. It was white kids and mostly Native Americans, a couple of Hispanics and a couple of blacks. I don't even remember if there was very much Asian, maybe a couple, but it was very predominantly white. Right. And one of the things that I loved about my upbringing is that over the summer, so my dad was a teacher, over the summer, we frequently went to California or upstate New York to be near our grandparents. And my dad would either work for his dad or he would work for my grandpa T to earn extra money over the summer. And my grandfather was my grandpa T was the branch president in the Utica, New York inner city branch. And the majority of the members there were minorities. There was a lot of Black, a lot of Asian, and I want to say some Puerto Rican. And I got the opportunity to engage with and experience that we're all humans. And I was expected to treat them the same. So even though my dad says to this day some really racist shit, he really does, y'all. It's pretty bad. But I don't think in his heart he's trying to harm somebody. But the shit that comes out of his mouth is pretty common stuff from his time period. I'm not saying it's okay, but understanding that he's doing the best that he can in that area and that he's not intentionally trying to be harmful softens the blow when it comes out of his mouth.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the one thing I want to add now to this whole September 6th thing, because we've talked about those 6, is that on the wasmormon.org site, it talks about how this is continued. It talks about, I'm just going to throw out some names, George P. Lee, who was a general authority, excommunicated, Lyndon Lamborn.
Why was George P. Lee excommunicated?
Well, it says he had been accused of making unauthorized contacts with Navajo leaders and advocating for a separate Navajo Mormon church. So apostasy and other violations of church law.
Okay.
Lyndon Lamborn, Tom Phillips. If you've listened to Mormon stories, that's I think that's one of the most popular stories there.
He's the general authority. Was he a 70? Or was he just in the... He got the second anointing. So he's one of the first people that have come out and explained. Yeah. Excellent episode. Head over to Mormon Stories and listen to that. It is an incredible set of listens. So absolutely do that. Okay, keep going.
So this says in 2014, for apostasy after he publicly criticized church teachings and participated in a campaign to resign from the church in protest. He also filed a legal complaint against church leaders alleging fraud and misrepresentation. John DeLynn, if you need to know anything about...
I freaking love that he was campaigning to get out of the church.
Yeah.
And instead of just being like, you bet, here you go. It was like, no, we're going to excommunicate you.
Right.
We're going to make a splash. You went out, let's make it a splash.
Let's make it a big deal, for sure.
Keep going.
Yeah.
John DeLynn.
And then John DeLynn, and I mean, for most of us in the ex-Mormon community, no need to even discuss that. This is a household name. A lot of his stuff has been about women's ordinations, LGBTQ issues.
Right. Well, and in the beginning, John was trying very hard to be friendly to the church. It was like, we still love the community. We still want to be a part of it. But he got excommunicated for speaking out for gay rights and feminism and equal rights for women. So once again, they're getting excommunicated for asking for equal rights for humanity.
Right. I think that is the underlying...
that's the theme?
Theme is that these people are looking for equality. They're looking for better representation of Mormon history. They're looking for more transparency.
They're looking for honesty.
They're looking for honesty from the leadership and towards the people who don't fall in line with the quote-unquote Mormon way. I don't even know
it's called the Mormon bubble. Okay.
Right. Well, and it's almost like, there's a conference talk recently that, God doesn't want us all to be the same, but he does want us to be all the same kind of a thing. Right. And I forget what they said, because that's not what they said, but that's kind of what is implied there. Right. And so they're fighting for transparency and equality. And those things ought to be, a for duh kind of a thing, but they're not. And it's almost like the Mormon Church takes pride in the fact that they're behind the times on everything. Right. Like, I can be, you know what, if you want to be behind the times on R-rated movies and swearing and tattoos, okay, fine. If that's what you want to be, that's fine. But if you're behind the times on the way that people treat other people, that's not okay with me. That's not okay. And if you were led by God, that wouldn't be the case, in my opinion.
So what would you say then, Mason? I'm going to pick on you. I'm going to pick that apart a little bit. Let me preface it with this. I learned how to be more accepting of humanity and normalizing humanity because of my field of study. It just came naturally, and I grew up. That's how it happened for me. And I don't mean that as a badge of honor. That's just my experiential expertise in this. Expertise is probably the wrong word, but my experiences, my experiences normalized this and nuanced it for me. You know, as your uncle said, I was reprogrammed in a horrible way to be more graceful and kind and accepting of humanity in general.
Right.
Oh God, help us all.
Right.
Here. Yeah.
Now you're letting all kinds of crap in. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But what about for you? Because a lot of these issues that you're talking about, it took until I left the church or until I was really pushing against you for you to get to a place where you were advocating for equal rights for gays and lesbians and women, and where you were starting to have issues with the racism and those types of things. Like, what's going on for you there? Because I know that you're not alone in having to get basically shoved into accepting humanity. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
The world's most exciting podcast, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, New York Times best-selling author and National Radio Hall of Fame inductee, Michael Savage.
I'm Michael Savage, host of the Savage Nation podcast, home of borders, language, and culture. Be here or be nowhere. The Savage Nation podcast.
Catch the Michael Savage podcast on all podcast platforms every Tuesday and every Friday.
Because your wife's a shover.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know if that I have a good answer to that. And part of that is because I still struggle with some of it. And I think that a lot of that just comes from the fact that it is the way I was raised, that I don't think that in Mormonism there's blatant, overt racism, but there is a hell of a lot of covert racism.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, they speak that on the outside. It's interesting, on one of these sites that I was looking at, it's one of those things where the covert message is way stronger than the overt message. And it's just gaslighting. So this is one of the 70, and I'm having a hard time reading his name, but how grateful I am that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has from its beginnings stood strongly against racism in any of its malignant manifestations. And it's just a blatant...
So you're having a hard time saying the name. Is that because it's blurred out on the website, or is it because you can't pronounce it?
I can't see it very well.
Oh, he's squinting, y'all. Let's see if we can get a name.
It looks like it's Elder Marion. I can't see the first name. It starts with an A. So Elder A. Marion from the First Quorum of the 70 currently.
Okay, and
so it
we will
be too
leave a
hard to
link
look
in
it
the
up.
show notes. Okay.
But anyway, it's this blatant, I'm just going to lie to your face and act like this is how it's always been.
Right.
When the reality is for more of the Mormon history has been
we've
blacks
been racist.
Can't have the priesthood.
Right,
then Mormon history has been blacks can have the priesthood.
Right, we have more years of discrimination against those with more melanin in their skin than we do non-discrimination. And by discrimination, I mean actively withholding privileges.
Right. And just like most issues, they didn't rescind that until 10 years after the huge United States civil rights motions where everything happened. Right. So that all happened in the 60s for the most part.
Right.
Martin
United
Luther
States
King was killed in the
60s.
60s. And then this rescinding by the church didn't happen until 1978. So a full 10 years after the United States was working on all of this, the church finally was like, oh, well, we're not going to do that anymore. And they want to just kind of gaslight you and say, well, that never really happened. We were never racist.
Right. Which is crap. Or it's more along the lines of, we were never racist. We were just doing what God said. But it's not our fault that we were jerks to all of you.
Right. So, and then to get back to the question that you gave me, if you're talking about gays and trans and all those things, I still struggle with a lot of that. And I'm working through it, but I think that it is, when it came to racism, I didn't really understand how much it was still affecting people until it was prevalent in my own home.
Right.
Bringing a black child into my home.
Same.
And living specifically in an area that is not accustomed to equality. Because in the military, that doesn't happen so much. Because you're in these bigger communities, and frankly, as a community, you better stand up and support that military community, or you're screwed. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember when I went to El Paso, there's a squirrel, but kind of goes in El Paso.
Glad it's your squirrel and not mine.
The Army always has, like, a list of places that you cannot go to. Usually they're like bars or strip clubs or things like that, or tattoo parlors where they sell drugs and things like that.
And usually it tends to be like a bunch of businesses all right next door to each other on the same damn road.
Well, in El Paso...
Talking about the Merc in North Carolina.
When I went to El Paso in 2004, I got this list, and it was like 8 organizations or maybe 12 organizations. It wasn't very many.
Right.
I read over it, but frankly, I didn't frequent any of those things anyway, so I didn't really have to pay attention to that. But then when I went to Fort Bragg in 2009, it was like 8 pages of places.
All the businesses on the Merc.
But the point being that the military really tried to put a foot down on those kinds of organizations that were not taking care of their soldiers.
Right.
And including racism, because there's as many blacks and whites and Asians and Mexicans and Hispanics in the Army as just about anything else. It's pretty equal, and so there's no place for that kind of crap. Right. Not that it doesn't still happen, but there's no place for it as an organization.
Right. I would say that when we were in Fayetteville, North Carolina, that was where our family experienced the most overt racism of us being white, raising a black child. Because I have an experience at the park, we were at a school event and somebody got all mad at us for adopting a black baby when we weren't black. I mean, there was a lot of really, it was intense at times.
Well, that's North Carolina. In North Carolina. The South, there's still a very much an acute issue.
But it was also one of the greatest places for love and acceptance. Like we saw the worst of it there, sides. But we also saw some of the best of it there. It was there that my black bishop and his wife helped me learn how to change my vocabulary so that I wasn't teaching things to my black daughter that would be culturally harmful for her. And they did it in a beautiful, loving, but straightforward way. I mean, I was so grateful to them for that. So we got the best and the worst in North Carolina, for sure, with regards to that. But yeah, I agree, Mason. So did you have something else you wanted to...
So anyway, the racism didn't really become at the forefront of my mind because in the military, we just didn't really see it very much. And then when we had our daughter, Abigail, of course, we were exposed to it more, and so it became more of an issue. Also, my family and extended family all seem to want to talk about how it doesn't happen anymore, and they're just ignorant of it because they're not exposed to it. Well, the same kind of pathway has happened for gays and lesbians, that except that I haven't been as personally exposed to it. I'm just trying to recognize that a lot of the things that I was taught and ingrained in my mind from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as I step away from that, I'm struggling to untangle those things as well.
To unpack it.
If you grow up from the time that you can think, believing that being gay is wrong, that it's a sin, it's really hard to then wrap your head around the fact that it's not, that this is okay. And then, of course, there's lots of other things that go along with it, like the being gay or lesbian, while they're all grouped together, is not nearly the same as being a trans person or struggling with your gender identity, period. And so I've struggled with those things a lot, and a lot of it comes from just the ingrained teachings, and I don't really know how to unravel it.
So what would your response today be regarding the LGBT community, the lovely statement that Sarah hates of love the sinner, hate the sin, love the sinner, whatever it is.
Right, hate the sin, love the sinner.
Yeah,
I don't think so. I think the problem with that statement is that if the person who you think is quote unquote sinning doesn't believe that they're sinning, that this is a part of who they are. So in this case, like being gay, I didn't choose to be gay, which is what at least most people who are gay or lesbian would say. I didn't choose to be gay. This is just who I am.
I was born this way.
So now you're asking them to separate.
Pause. Science, as we study it, supports born that way. Just want to say that. Keep going.
Right. There's science to support that now, which of course we didn't have when I was growing up.
Right.
But if you're asking them to separate a piece of who they are rather than a behavior that they're doing, obviously those are different. You can't do that. You can't take a piece of somebody away from them and still love them. So I don't think that you can love someone unconditionally while hating something about them. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. I don't know, but that's kind of where I am, is that you can't really truly love someone while hating something about them. You can dislike things. I mean, the first place my head goes is to a marriage, right? You're with someone that you love deeply, but maybe you also don't love implicitly because you get to see all the bad things that they have to offer. You see that more than anybody else. And so there's a struggle there with loving completely, but also disliking, these things that are happening.
Right. My question is, are you talking about, I see that more than anybody else, as a reference to our relationship, or as my job as a counselor? Because I've got some things we got to unpack if you're talking about our relationship.
Just relationships in general, right? Well, we see each other closer than almost anybody else will see.
But the difference here is that, when we're talking about it, it's more like, I'll use our relationship, for example. You love me. You hate the fact that my shoes are everywhere all the time, which, for the record, since our children are no longer toddlers wearing my shoes all over the house, my shoes aren't everywhere anymore. But Mason never believed me, so I've got some wounds going on here about this. So anyway.
Right, but it would be like, instead,
it would be like, I love Sarah, but I hate that she has blue eyes.
Right, or I hate that you're short. Or, something that is just, there's nothing you can do about it.
Something I have no control over.
Right, it is who you are.
And I would say that when I'm working with couples in relationships, I'm not hearing I don't like parts of them that they can't change. What they're talking about are, I'm struggling with the fact that my spouse is overspending, or that my spouse is struggling with being honest, or that my spouse has an addiction, or that I don't feel heard or connected with my spouse. We're not talking about intrinsic parts of who you are.
Right.
We're talking about behaviors that, for the most part, every relationship would struggle with. It's rare for me to get a couple that comes in and they want something to be changed that I haven't heard before. I mean, it happens every now and then.
Right. Well, and I don't think that religion in general, not just Christianity, but religion in general, I don't think that they do a good job of seeing people as they are, or seeing them as they see themselves.
Right.
And that's a big part. Like, if I want to understand what's going on for a gay person or a lesbian person or what trans person, I need to be able to see them the way that they see themselves. And that's tough still. I have a hard time with that, but I'm getting better at it. It's just a process.
Well, and I would say one of the best ways to really begin to unpack that is through empathy. And that is put yourself in their shoes. So, Mason, imagine a world where you being sexually aroused by a woman was sinful. So it doesn't matter. Every time you see, a magazine with a woman who is scantily clad, that's a sin.
Well, that's not dissimilar from what I did grow up with. So I'm not sure that's going to work in the pathway you're looking for.
Right, but let me finish. And that even as a married man, you have somebody you care about, but you're not allowed to express that with physical intimacy. I love this person. I'm not allowed to hold their hand without it being problematic. I'm not allowed to put my arm around them without it being problematic. I'm not allowed to kiss them without it being problematic. I'm not allowed to think about this person who I have feelings for in any sexual way without that being problematic. And I'm definitely not allowed to have sex with them because that also would be problematic. Now put yourself in those shoes. I'm not talking about like when you're a teenager and everybody's kind of awkward about it. I'm talking about throughout your entire life, you have to suppress your natural sexual proclivities.
Right.
What you like, what you don't like. If it's like, you know what, Mason, you are only allowed to be aroused by a female with red hair because brown-haired women and blonde-haired women are off limits. What are you going to do about that? Like, how do you do that?
Well, and that's a deep question, I'm sure, but the initial thought is that sounds hellish.
Right. It sounds... Mason just dropped his Rubik's Cube. That's his coping mechanism right now.
Yeah, it sounds hellish is the first way that I would put it. It just sounds awful.
Yeah. So I would say if you are in Mason's shoes where you're still working on undoing that portion of who you are, where you are challenging things you've been taught from the time you're little, one of the best places to start is to truly put yourself in the shoes of the person that you are judging and try and see the world from their perspective. That can really open your eyes. And if you're having a problem doing that, immerse yourself in literature or podcast material or content that helps you see it, like watching movies. What is the movie with Tom Hanks where he's dying of AIDS? Philadelphia. That would be a great movie to watch. There's a lot of them. I loved the movie The Hate U Give that was recent that talked about police brutality. I felt like they did a really good job in that movie of showing both sides. Now, the police side was a brief introduction, but it was beautifully done. So find material that is good representation of those minority populations and partake.
Well,
so that way you can open your eyes to a different way of thinking.
Right. For me, I just have to learn how to not judge. And that's it. In some ways it's been easy. Some ways it's been very difficult. And it's a process.
Yeah.
It's a process.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank. And like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why don't we move on?
Well, I wanted to do one more shout out. We did not talk about Sam Young.
Okay.
As a,
Well, let me just go back to this list if you want me to.
Keep going. Just start naming them off.
Let me get down to this list here. Okay, so the next one was Jeremy Runnels, CES letter. If you haven't read the CES letter, does a very good job of exposing you to a lot of the issues that go along with the church. And of course, he was eventually excommunicated for that. Interestingly, it's called the CES letter because he sent it hoping for some answers to a CES representative, which of course he didn't get.
I think it was to the CES director at the time,
right.
The one.
Right. So Elder James Hamula, who was released as a member of the Quorum of the 70, and
I think
it doesn't
his was
say much
because
about
of
it.
a marital affair, actually. Hamula's, I think, was for an
So
affair.
the disciplinary council is private. The church stated it was not due to disillusionment or apostasy. No. Then Bill Reel. Again, if you don't know Bill Reel, then you just have not been a part of the ex-Mormon community at all.
Right.
And then Sam Young. So he was excommunicated in 2018 for apostasy after he launched a campaign to end the practice of asking children sexually explicit questions in one-on-one interviews with church leaders. He argued that the practice was harmful and put children at risk of abuse. And if you have listened to our podcast or other podcasts, we've talked about abuse before. It is rampant and certainly more present than we want it to be.
Right. And I think,
so he fought for that.
There were a couple. The other one I'm going to talk about. So the one that I said, so Sam Young's pissed me off because I'm like, we are talking about the safety of our children.
Well, and so many things.
Like he wasn't speaking out negatively about the church at all, other than put two adults in the room with the bishop. And the church was like, you're not allowed to come up with that change or say that. You're out. Hey, let's make it a new rule that we have two adults in the interview.
So like a lot of things, after he was excommunicated, they took a lot of his ideas and used them.
Right.
But you can't speak out. And this is an issue that needed to be spoken out against. So,
absolutely. So I know for me, my personal story, I was furious about the excommunication of Sam Young. I followed that one. I was literally pissed because in my field, I was seeing it happen right in front of my eyes, and I was watching the church shove it under the rug and protect the perpetrator, which it made me livid. And then Natasha Helfer Parker
so
is
she's the next one on the list here, yeah.
And when they excommunicated Natasha Helfer Parker, I came to you, Mason, and said, I'm done. I'll be next. Not next as in as public, but I agree with pretty much everything Natasha Helfer Parker is saying from a clinical, evidence-based practices standpoint.
Right.
Like the research is supporting what she's saying. She's not saying change this because, God, anything. Like she was saying, we've got to be better for our kids. We've got to show up better for sexual health. If you read my book, you are going to be able to see that the way I was brought up in Mormonism and the way that sexual health and boundaries were explained to me was incredibly toxic. Right. Or not explained. Yeah. Was incredibly toxic for me. And so when I am watching Natasha Helfer Parker get excommunicated for speaking out about sexual health from a scientific, professional standpoint, I was like, I'm not going to shut up either. I'm just as outspoken as that beautiful soul. I'm going to be on the chopping block. And it was the following day after she got X'd was when I came to you and said, I'm submitting my resignation. And I didn't give you a choice about it. And for me, it was, I'm not putting my family through that type of a court at all. I won't do it.
Yeah.
Because it would harm my for Natasha, her kids were grown up. And so impacted very differently than me with kids that are still in primary and you're still actively taking them to church. That was the final straw for Sarah, and I resigned my membership.
I remember being pissed off because she had been living in Utah for like a year or so, and it was her old stake in Oklahoma or something.
Ohio, I think,
It was Oklahoma. That held the
it was
court.
a state
I was like,
this
is not even how it works. This is not how this works. And I was pissed about that.
Right. It was like you guys went outside of the handbook. It's almost like most likely what happened was her bishop in Oklahoma or stake in Oklahoma was willing to do it, and her stake in Utah wasn't.
Right. Right, and so somebody forced the issue, and that happened with some of the September 6th as well. So.
Well, and they wouldn't let her bring her phone in, which had her notes. I mean, they're probably sick and tired of people secretly recording them and showing what jackasses they are.
They should be recorded.
Agree.
Yeah, you should have the ability to record it.
Right, they would not let her speak for herself. Like, they should have said, hey, we won't let your phone in. Here's a paper and a pencil. Go ahead and transfer your notes. Like, they did not give her that opportunity either, which is just par for the course.
Probably we have Bill Reel to blame for that.
Silencing. Yeah, go Bill. No, that's awesome. But see, that's what's so beautiful about Bill Reel is that he did record it. And what you have from that is just...
It's gold, yeah.
It's gold. Yeah. It is so beautiful. And you can tell from Bill Reel's experience that most of the people in that room were doing the best they knew how to do. Right. And that most of them had no idea the issues that were being covered up. Because if you're an active believing member,
you don't search that stuff out.
Listen.
Yeah.
So Mason, I'm going to shift gears here. What was it like for you to read the book, The People's History of the United States?
So a little background, The People's History of the United States really follows essentially the poor in America and what the history of America is like from their perspective. So it was really hard. I listened to it rather than reading it. I listened to it, but it was really hard to listen to because it is an underside of, I'm sure this isn't exclusive to the United States of America, but it's an underside of the United States of America that I think we're ashamed of as a people, and most of us are not aware of because we don't want to be aware of it. And same for me. But it really displays a different kind of history because it talks about
that wasn't in our textbooks.
It talks about the poor, it talks about racism, and it talks about women's rights. And I think that's the bulk of it. So it tries to go through all these issues from the perspectives of those groups. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some others, but that's what I remember from that. And so yeah, it was just seeing things from that perspective and recognizing that, history is told by the victors kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But this is my own house, basically. I'm not reading the history of Africa. I'm reading the history of my country and how much of it is despicable and how little we do as a country to help people in those situations. It was hard.
I feel like reading that was eye-opening for sure. But it also helped me recognize that it's not just religious organizations that are whitewashing and picking and choosing what our children are taught, what we are taught. And so, yeah, I absolutely love...
History is told by the victor.
Right. And so I think it's really important for us to see both sides. I mean, I think it's important to read about World War II from the Nazi perspective, not because I want everybody to start treating people the way the Nazis did, but because it gives you a much better understanding of how good people did horrific things because of a belief that was pushed by a government. And so I think, again, it's that, if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it.
Repeat it, yeah.
All righty. So at the end of the day, we are celebrating my book being published and available. So if you go out and buy my book today, it will actually arrive in your mail or on your Kindle device. So if it's Kindle, immediately it'll upload. Right now, if you've purchased my book, so I'm recording this in August, so before today, when you hear this, if you had purchased the book, it was like, it will upload automatically to your device on September 6th. So if you do it now, it'll upload automatically. Or if you buy one of the hard copies, either the paperback or the hardback, it will get to you very shortly, depending on what Amazon type account you have. If you got Amazon Prime, it'll probably get to you the next day or within 48 hours. And then the audiobook is also available today. And so for me today, I finalized another 9 chapters of that and also identified areas that need a little touch up in the recording because I stumbled over my words. And so that's been really exciting for us. And we just wanted to kind of celebrate. Mason, as you read that book, as you read my book, what was that like for you? As far as how did I do in being honest? And how has that truth-telling been difficult or a value for you?
Well, for those of you that read the book, you'll understand that I'm still processing a lot of things. The story that's in the book is not the story that I got along the way in a lot of situations, and so that was tough as I listened to what is essentially the real story. And not that feel like you...
Can you say more about that?
Not that I feel like you lied about it, but it's just a process of, when you're writing a story and you're throwing it all out there like you did, you're going to consider details important to the story that you might not either consider important or even be in a place that you can share when you're in the thick of that moment. So when you go to someone 2 weeks after an affair happens and you're sharing because you can't hold it in anymore, but you want to be honest about it, it's going to be nearly impossible for you to share everything in the way that it absolutely exactly happened, because everything's raw. Everything is painful both to you and to the person that you're telling. And so it's going to be difficult for you to share things in exactly the way that they are, because I don't even know if it's possible at that moment in time. I
would say that so we're talking about an affair. I cheated on Mason, and I show my ugliest side in the book. Literally as I wrote it, and then as I've read it, and then as I'm editing the audio files, I'm like, oh my gosh, Sarah, what are you thinking? Stop. And I'm like, okay, Sarah, you already know the outcome because this is your life. But I'm literally talking to my younger self, being like, don't go, just don't do that. Stop. And I didn't. But what I can say is that as I've worked with couples who are working through affairs, it's actually pretty common for more bits and more details to come out as you heal from that affair. And it's horrible for the victims, because it's like, why didn't you just tell me everything in the beginning? And as I'm going to use the word perpetrator of the affair, the affair and the affairee, the cheating partner and the cheated partner. There we go. We'll use those words. As the cheating partner, there is so much context to it. So many different reasons why, so many different pieces that play in. None of them a good excuse for it happening at all. But I remember, Mason, when I came to you, I only wanted to give you enough information so that you knew that it had happened. But I didn't want it to hurt you any more than it was already going to hurt you. And a lot of times, the partner that was cheated on is like, hit me with everything. And the person that cheated is like, I can't do that to you. It will hurt too much. And you end up in this horrible, now that I'm just now finding about this, and it opens the wound all up again. And I'm here to say that's a normal part of the healing journey when it comes to healing from affairs. So if you're in that position, please go get professional help so that you can normalize what that looks like. Because where Mason and I made the mistake is we didn't go get professional help. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
The world's most exciting podcast, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, New York Times best-selling author and National Radio Hall of Fame inductee, Michael Savage.
I'm Michael Savage, host of the Savage Nation podcast, home of borders, language, and culture. Be here or be nowhere. The Savage Nation podcast.
Catch the Michael Savage podcast on all podcast platforms every Tuesday and every Friday.
And you're going to read about that in my book. Like, Mason, your response at the time was, and I just actually did the audiobook edits of this chapter. Your response was, I went to the bishop, I confessed the sin. It was basically over. Like, Jesus is going to forgive you, therefore I'm going to forgive you, and we're not going to talk about it. And we didn't.
Yeah.
And that really eroded us from the inside out. And it's not been until all this church stuff has come up that we've really gone back into the details of those stories, which is why, I mean, it's been what? Almost 20 years? It's been 19 years since I had the affair the first time.
Well, and mostly those details came out in the book. Like they haven't come up just in normal conversation. They've come up in the book. And, you know, you asked how I'm doing. I was gutted when I read it because, of course, this was early in the process. I have only read through your book one time.
The rough draft. He read through
I read through a rough draft, and I've read pieces along the way, of course.
There were a lot more details in the rough draft. We had to cut those out so that it wasn't like a saga.
So yeah, I got all that, and gratefully so. But one of the things that I had when I read this quote from D. Michael Quinn about the general authorities praise free agency, but also limit the prerequisites, access to information, uninhibited inquiry, and freedom of expression. My first thought was that this is difficult, but it is absolutely necessary to real understanding. And I feel like that was the case here too, is that in order for us to heal completely, or at least start the process of healing completely, it's like an infection. I'm medical, right? If you only get out some of the infection, it will come back. It may not come back right away, but it will come back. And so when I got all of this information, it was hard to read. It gutted me, mostly because a lot of the details were significantly different. Mm-hmm. And so I struggled with this new information and how to process it, what to do with it. And that was tough, but it was raw and real. I always felt like the way that you had written it was not dramatic. It was simply a telling of how this happened. In fact, one of the things it was hard to read, of course, but you described in detail the few weeks leading up to the affair, which I never knew about.
Right. Well, and you didn't know about it because I hid it.
Right. I didn't know that it was going on, and then we never talked about it afterwards because the event, like you said, I didn't want to talk about it. The event was over. You had done what I thought was necessary for us to heal from this, which I understand now was not the case, but you had done what then I thought was necessary. So let's move on. Let's heal. Let's get over this. And that, of course, wasn't very helpful. But so seeing the details, it really helped me believe that this was what actually happened. So it was a raw telling of it. I found myself doing the same thing. Why are you doing this? Don't do this kind of a thing.
Like, Sarah, what the hell were you thinking?
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's important because, you know, for people who have been in a situation similar to this, they want to be able to understand that they're not alone, that the quote unquote dumb mistakes that they made in the process of what happened, other people have done the same thing. And I think that when you get right down to the truth telling that we're trying to do for this series, you have to be able to share because you're not alone in what you're thinking. Other people have thought the same things. Other people have been in the place that you are or are in the place that you are. And by speaking it out loud, it gives other people the voice to say, yes, I've been there. And then as we're able to process and deal with those things, other people can say either, oh, yeah, I did that too, or, oh, I get it. That's what I need to do, or I need to not do that, or I need to do this, or whatever. You get more details about how you can actually manage a difficult situation. And so it's difficult for your dirty laundry to be aired out there. It's difficult for my dirty laundry because I certainly didn't handle the situation very well either. It's difficult for it to be out there, but I think that it will help people in general.
Yeah. I can say that as I wrote the book, there was a determination to present the information as honestly as I knew how to do. And gratefully, my editor, Zuri, was like, hey, you're whitewashing your own history. Make it,
right.
Be real, Sarah. Which I'm so grateful for. And I'm grateful that it was Zuri that was in my head fighting back those demons, because if it had been Mason, we'd have never gotten to the end of the book, just because we were both so impacted. I mean, it's our story. We are entangled in it.
And if I'd have had to, maybe I could have gotten through it okay, but it would have been the most difficult thing I've ever done.
Right. I did not share the story with Mason and those chapters with Mason really until the book was completed, because I needed to be able to write it without worrying about how the actual story was going to impact him. He knew that it was different. He knew that there were going to be more details of what led up to that affair, but he didn't know what they were. And honestly, I had hit a point where we had talked about it in snippets off and on for 17, 18 years. Right. I couldn't remember what you knew and what you didn't know. There was no way for me to tell, because we didn't just sit down with a counselor and work through it. We did it in the wrong way, y'all. So if that's what's going on for you, go get professional help, please.
Well, and as you read the book, you'll realize that it wasn't just that one event either, right? It happened, other things happened later on down the road. And so, yeah, it wasn't just a one time and we're done kind of a thing. It was... Right. So I get it that,
right,
details,
ongoing...
you're not sure what you have. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I didn't ever want to talk about it. I did not ever want to talk about it, because every time I thought about the situation, it hurt. And if you know anything about me, I do not like pain, particularly emotional pain. I just don't like it. And I've done lots of things that are unhealthy in my life to avoid emotional pain. And this was one of those things.
Right.
I did not want to talk about it. And now that it's out there, and we've had to talk about some of it, it's been rough, but also I feel like we're finally on the path to actually healing from the events that happened then. And that has meant a lot.
I think we're better for it. For the record, Mason did give me the green light to write it and have it published before I did so. So you asked for it. It's your fault.
Sure. That's how we're going to label that. Yeah, sure.
So I am really, really excited about this. I've got another one of my friends. So I texted my friends that are part of my book army, so they got access to pre-read it and whatnot. They were part of that process. And one of those readers, I sent out a message to several of them and said, hey, here, let me just read what I asked them. I said, hey, girls, we are doing a book promo and want to know what parts of my book was I honest about my shit that was inspiring or healing for you. Because honestly, you're going to read a lot about Sarah's shit in the book.
Well, you're not a very likable protagonist, that's for sure.
At times in the book.
At least in part of the book, you're just not.
At times in the book, I'm not a likable person.
If that doesn't prove that you're being honest, I don't know what else will. So.
And one of the responses I get is, I remember thinking that my uncle's family were all perfect and that I should be more like them. As they've grown up, they are so messed up and much worse off than me. It's really nice to see somebody who felt like me and was able to overcome it by being honest about their frailties. So yeah, that means a lot to me. I think that in a lot of religious communities, we are put in a position where we have to pretend to be somebody that we are not. And that when we are constantly hiding behind a mask of something that is not authentic to who we really are, the worst parts of us show up. And that as I have been able to be honest with myself about the good and the bad and the ugly, and the mediocre. As I've learned how to accept that my efforts are good enough, and good enough is beautiful. It really is, especially in parenting and body image. Good enough is beautiful. It's a wonderful place to be. I'm still working on it with the body image stuff, going to be honest. But that as I have been able to embrace who I really am, I am so much happier. And I really, really hope that my story can help you accept who you are, the good, the bad, the ugly, the mediocre. That you can say it's okay to not be perfect. I don't have to be ideal. And that you can have grace for humanity. That was my goal. And that it is warming my heart as people are responding to my book and expressing that that's what they've gotten out of my story. So please, listeners, go read the book. Go buy the book. If you've already done that, please leave us a review on Amazon, on Goodreads. Reviews
and
are
tell people.
Yes, and share the book on your social media accounts. We will be doing a monthly trauma bonded book club Q&A. If you email me proof that you shared my book on social media, you will get free access to that Q&A with Sarah. It's a $25 value. It's a webinar that I will be doing. We will be posting the dates for those on the website. In order for you to have the link and the passcode, you've got to shoot me or email me your screenshot that you've shared it on your social media accounts. Or if you're interested in paying that $25 and coming in and being able to process some of those events and ask me very personal questions, no topic is off limits, we will be doing that. We will be having one a month for the next, I believe we've scheduled 6 months, where we will have that webinar. It will be through Zoom, and it will be encrypted and passcode protected. The only people that are going to be allowed to be in there are those who have paid or those who have earned that free entrance by sharing my book on their social media pages. And of course, I love to hear from my readers and my listeners. If you want to reach out directly to me, you can do so at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. You can find the schedule for those webinars at sarahwestbrookbooks.com, and that's my name, Sarah. H makes my name perfect. Westbrook books .com, not .com, or at daisygirlcommunications.com. So thanks so much for being here today. We are really excited about my book launch today. We're going to have a party, and I will be in Snowflake, Arizona, doing a book signing at the Purgatory on Main Street on September 16th. If you would like to have me come to your area for a book signing or a speaking event, please feel free to reach out to me through the website or at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. I would love to be there for you. Thanks so much. We will see you next time.
Love you guys. Thanks for being here.
Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook, produced by Daisy Girl Communications, LLC, and Alex Vidalis. Please join our community on Facebook. Music provided by Musa and John Worthy Music. Glad it's your squirrel and not mine.